Hello, welcome back to What Now on the Threshold of Life, Death, and Grief. And I'm here with my friends and colleagues,
David Kennedy
and Red Keating.
And I'm Julie Brown. And today we are delighted to welcome two new guests with us. Well, one returning guest, Dr. Natalie Whiting. Welcome, Natalie.
Thank you, Julie.
And Emily Lamott. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you.
So I think to get us started today, we're going to discuss fascinating topic, organ and tissue donation today. Emily, could you tell us a little bit about your role with that and help our listeners get to know you?
Sure, I'll give that a try. So I am a registered nurse, and I've been a nurse for over 20 years. And I've been a specialist coordinator for organ and tissue donation for almost 10 years already. And so what I do in that role is primarily support any potential organ or tissue donor and work with assessing that donor for eligibility and walk them and their family through the whole process of donation and beyond, and support them with some after care after a successful donation as well.
And I know that you work at our local hospital here in Peterborough Regional Health Centre. Are you an employee of this hospital? Does every hospital have someone in your role? Or does your role kind of transcend the institution of our local hospital?
That's a good question. So I'm not actually an employee at the hospital. I was for many years working in the ICU until I started working for Trillium. So I'm officially an employee of Ontario Health, Trillium Gifted Life Network. And I am based at Peterborough Hospital, but I also support donors and potential donation situations outside of Peterborough Hospital, at other hospitals within the province, and wherever I'm needed, really. If I'm on call for donation, I might be on the road going to Kingston Hospital or Belleville Hospital, wherever the case may be.
Okay. And one more question. Could you just briefly tell us what the Trillium Gift of Life Network, is that what you said?
Correct.
Yeah. Can you just describe that a little bit to us?
Yes. So Trillium is the province's organ and tissue donation procurement organization. That is a mouthful. And so they are responsible for coordinating all of the organ and tissue donation that happens in the province and transplantation that happens in the province as well. And so the mission is to save and enhance as many lives as possible through organ and tissue donation.
Okay.
And do all provinces have an organization like that?
That is a good question. Most provinces do. I believe that the territories do not. And Ontario is probably the most active, doing the highest number of donations. I know BC is pretty active as well, but Ontario has a lot of transplant programs. There's 7, I believe, in the province.
So glad to have you tonight, Emily, and to learn from your expertise in this area. And we also have Dr. Natalie Whiting, long-term palliative physician in our city, and also very interested in this area. And can you tell us a little bit about what brings you to this, for this to be something of interest or a passion for you, Natalie?
So, as Julie said, I'm a palliative physician from Peterborough and recently retired. And because of a personal connection I've had with organ and tissue donation, it had been one of my hopes that during retirement I would be able to spearhead a bit of a project at our local hospice to create a formalized process for offering residents in our hospice to have the opportunity to participate in tissue donation if they wanted to. So that's in the very, very early stages. But really what brought me to wanting to do that project in the first place was a personal family connection to organ and tissue donation. So one of my sister-in-laws, her name is April. She was diagnosed in late 2019 with a brain tumor. and had a brief illness and died in the spring of 2020. And April, at 52, had already donated blood 80 times or more, I think, in her life. So her values were very aligned with this concept of donation and kind of giving what you had to better the lives of other people. So when she knew that she would not be able to survive her cancer, she asked me if I would help her to make the arrangements so that she could donate her eyes after death. And we were able to do that together. And she died in her home and was able to donate her eyes. And after her death, her family received a letter thanking them for her donation, as well as a medal from Trillium Gift of Life. But in the letter, it said that April's gift had restored sight to 4 different people. And so that was a very, very meaningful form of legacy for our family, and really allowed her to remain true to who she was even after she had died. Yeah, so for me, really being able to be involved in this podcast or in promoting organ and tissue donation, it's a little bit of a legacy project for her.
It's hard to believe that 2 eyes could help 4 people.
It
right?
is.
That gift was a shock to me. That's bigger than you might expect, right? Mm-hmm. I wouldn't have known that.
I've actually, 1 eye donor can help up to 10 people. It's typically the cornea that's transplanted most frequently. So that's the clear outer portion of the eye. And so you have 2 corneas, of course. And so those would go to 2 different recipients. And then the sclera tissue, the white part of the eye, is also used in lots of different eye surgeries. And so in most of those surgeries, like for glaucoma, things like that, or reconstructive type surgeries, they usually only need a very small piece of sclera tissue. So the 1 donor can often have up to 4 pieces per eye. So up to 10 people can be benefited from the 1 donation.
Now, you've mentioned organ donation, and then you've also said tissue. And I'm assuming the way you're talking about it, there's a difference. Is there a difference between organ donation and a tissue donation?
There is a difference. Like, I feel like all organ and tissue donation are really selfless gifts from a donor to a recipient, that in most cases they are a complete stranger. But the main difference is that the organ donation refers to our vital organs like the heart, lungs, liver, the kidneys, the pancreas, and the intestine. And for donating and then transplanting those types of organs, the donation surgery has to happen within minutes after the donor has died and circulation has stopped. So it's very time sensitive. And tissue donation, such as eye tissue, bone, connective tissue like tendons and ligaments, skin, and heart valves, those can all be recovered up to 24 hours after somebody has died and the circulation has stopped. So it is time sensitive as well, but not nearly as tricky a timeline to meet as for organ donation.
You said that you've been doing this work for about 10 years in
Almost.
This role. What have you seen as the biggest change in those 10 years? What do you see as growing in this area?
That's a tough question. It's one of the reasons that the job has been interesting is that there are always new innovations in the world of transplant and in donation as well, because we're always trying to help as many people as possible. It's a very scarce resource to have organ and tissue donation. There's actually 1,700 people, almost 1,700 people on the wait list in Ontario right now for an organ transplant. And unfortunately, every 3 days, somebody passes away and is taken off of that wait list. So we're always looking at new innovations to find ways to increase donation opportunities and help as many people as possible. So I could give a lot of examples of innovations, but one of the things that happened early in my career was expanding the donor pool to include donors who have Hep C, so Hep C positive donors. That's a very high percentage of our population. And so it really, by accepting those organs, it really does increase our donor pool. And it's a treatable illness. And so somebody who needs a life-saving organ transplant, having the small risk of getting Hep C from that transplant is well worth it.
Can you kind of walk us through the process around how, from the beginning of round, how you might come to be engaged with an individual and what that looks like?
Yeah, so for an organ donor situation, one of the reasons that it is so rare, and I don't think I mentioned how rare it is, but less than 3% of all the deaths that happen in a hospital happen in a way that make the patient actually even eligible for organ donation. And that's because a donor needs to be typically in an ICU type setting on some sort of life support during their end of life period. And then, of course, they also need to be medically eligible. So things like active cancer are ruling most people out for organ donation. It's too risky for a recipient to have. For most cancers, there are some less aggressive cancers that are safe for organ donation. And for eye donation, donating corneas is safe with somebody who has active cancer, as you are aware. So this potential donor, if they're in the ICU at a hospital, if they're meeting certain triggers that indicate that they're at end of life, then the hospital staff notify somebody like myself at Trillium, and we do initial screening to determine if there's eligibility there. Then they look up the donor registration list to see if that person has registered as an organ donor. After that, then if they do have eligibility, then somebody like myself would meet with the family to reconfirm that that person is wanting to be an organ donor. And then if they are consenting, then we would go through with testing that includes blood work, CAT scans. We have to do a medical and social history questionnaire with the family to determine any other risk factors that might be present for donation. And then once we've determined which organs are eligible for transplant, then we would match them with the most appropriate recipients and do an organ donation surgery at the hospital. And once organs are recovered, then they all get transported to their new homes, wherever those transplant centers are, where those recipients are waiting.
And what if someone is not on the list? What if you haven't registered yourself as an organ donator? Can you approach?
Yes.
How does that happen then?
Yeah, great question. There's only, in Ontario, I think it's about 35% of people are registered. And in Peterborough area, it's actually 51%. So I think that reflects really positively on the population in Peterborough of people who want to help out in that way. But I think a lot of people are not planning for death. And I know, for example, my son turned 16 last year, and you get asked at Service Ontario when you get a new health card or when you get your driver's license, they ask you, do you want to register as an organ donor? And my son said he'll think about it, knowing the work that I did. And I talked to him afterwards, and he says, yeah, it doesn't matter. I know you'll make me a donor no matter what. So he feels like he doesn't have to go through the process of actually registering, which is a really simple process. It takes about 2 minutes of your time. But he says he's willing to donate, just hasn't actually done the registration. But back to your question, if somebody hasn't registered, then we do still ask if the person is eligible to be a donor. We ask the family to make that decision on their behalf. And we explore what their values were as a person, if they would want to help in that way. And it is challenging for some family members to make that decision. So I really try to get the word out to people to register your wishes, and almost more importantly, talk to your family and your friends and the people who are going to be left behind. Because when I'm having conversations with families who are in that position, they're so overwhelmed. There's so many emotions going on and they're in shock. It's one more decision that they have to make, and it's a burden of decision in a lot of cases. And for some families, it's easy and they know that that's the kind of person that their loved one is and they would want to give that gift. But for some people, it just seems like too much of a difficult decision. If they haven't had that conversation before, they don't want to make a decision on their behalf.
Now, there has been discussion, and I'm not sure, I think there's one province that followed this tract of a default being donation, that you actually have to opt out of that donation. Is that true?
Mm-hmm. Yes, you're right. It was a few years ago, Nova Scotia implemented deemed consent, or an opt-out system. So in their provincial registry, everyone is assumed to be wanting to donate organs and tissues after death. But people who don't want to, they can go in and, the same as we can register to donate, they can unregister to not donate. And in Nova Scotia, they still have a consent conversation with the family or substitute decision makers. If somebody is in the position to be a donor, then they still speak to family and substitutes and confirm that that's what they would want to do.
Natalie, is that in all your years as a palliative physician, and you were in family practice as well, were you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is this a conversation that is coming up? I mean, I know it's I would think it would be part of advanced care planning.
It is and should be a part of advanced care planning. In my experience, even in my own clinical practice, I'm almost embarrassed to say I don't think I spoke about it with as many people as I really should have. There's just so much to plan for. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that any of us are well trained in understanding the process of particularly tissue donation, which is possible after a natural death or a prolonged illness for people who have not been in intensive care. And those are the people that we would be caring for as palliative physicians. I don't think that we have a really strong understanding and awareness of what's involved in making the practical arrangements to help that happen for people. So I think that's what I'm in a way trying to rectify or hoping to change for the future.
Did that ever come up in your training?
It only came up in my training in the sense that my training was in British Columbia. And what we called at that time the Eye Bank of British Columbia actually trained us to retrieve eyes after death if people had consented to eye donation. So I actually had that experience of retrieving eyes after death for people when I was working in my residency. But the practicality of how do you discuss donation with people? How do you arrange that for them if they're dying at home or if they're dying in a hospice setting? That part was not part of our education.
And another fact that I'm just hearing, even from the simple part of the Healthcare Ontario saying, yes, I'll be a donor, the importance of not only consenting, but then telling people in your life that you have consented to this. Not only am I on the list, but like this is something I want as part of my value system, is something I'm pulling out from this conversation.
Yeah, I strongly agree with that. It really helps people when they're faced with a conversation like that, if they have that confidence to know that, yes, this is what my loved one would want me to choose for them, because they've had conversations about it. And I meet families who have had those conversations and families who've never had those conversations. And it's much easier for them if they know what their loved one's wishes are.
How does it impact things like the funeral arrangements and those rituals afterwards? What happens in that?
We have lots of families who have very specific rituals that we always try to ask about and make sure that we can incorporate into any donation scenario, and haven't really had any challenges with that. People often worry about, will they be allowed to have an open casket, or will that be possible after eye recovery or organ and tissue donation? And the answer to that is yes. So if there is a organ donation, then there is an incision that's on the body. So it's from the chest down to the abdomen. And so that's covered by normal clothing. And for eye recoveries, then there's a prosthetic that's put into place if the whole eye globe was recovered. Sometimes with eye donation, it's actually not the whole eye that's recovered. So if they're only planning to recover corneas, then they do what's called in situ recovery, where it's only the cornea that's removed, so the person's eye is still in place. And so in general, there's no markings or evidence that donation happened. So nobody needs to know unless the family would like to share that information. And even if the whole eye was taken, then like I said, there is the prosthetic that's used, and the funeral directors are very skilled if there's any bruising or anything like that present that's covered up by makeup.
I want to go back just to get a bit of clarification. Let's say I'm not going into Service Ontario, I'm renewing my health card, but I would like to become an organ donor. Are there other ways of registering for that, or is it through Services Ontario?
Yes. So the registration is all maintained through Service Ontario, and there's lots of ways to do your registration. So in person at Service Ontario, or when you get that renewal notice in the mail for renewing your health card, there's paperwork that goes with that. And so you can register at any time by mail, the old-fashioned way. And as well, any of us can go on the computer or go on your phone to beadonor.ca. And all you need is your health card number and date of birth, and put those in, and you can check to see that you are registered, or register your intentions if you haven't registered yet. And there are options. Some people choose to donate certain organs and tissues and leave other organs and tissues out. And there's also an option to donate towards research and educational purposes, transplant-related research and education activities, or you can decline the research and training option when you register.
Are there any costs involved to this process to anyone?
No. Trillium has a policy that they don't want any donor to incur any costs for organ and tissue donation. So funeral costs, of course, are still a responsibility of the family, but there's no cost to the family for any of the care involved in testing for donation or recovery of organs or tissues or anything like that.
Natalie, you mentioned the word legacy in terms of your family's story. Is it possible to speak to a little bit more about what you mean about a legacy in terms of donating organs or tissues?
Well, I think for my sister-in-law, she had reached a stage in her life where she became very disabled and was not able to engage in a lot of the activities that she would have earlier in life. And planning for this and knowing that this was happening was one way of her still being able to, I guess, engage with the world, give something back to another person, be generous, and just kind of continue to honor the person she had always been, even though she physically couldn't do what she used to do. And within her family, she was actually the second generation to have donated eyes at death, because her mother-in-law, or I guess my spouse's mother, died at a younger age as well, and she had also donated her eyes. So today, in preparation for the podcast, April's spouse sent me a picture of both of the medals, both his mother's medal and his wife's medal.
Nice.
From eye donation. And, this is something that they've kept in their family for many, many, many years. And I think it's a source of pride for their family. Mm-hmm. And although I don't think it can really minimize grief in any way, I think it is comforting in some ways for them to know that that their family has been generous like this. And yeah.
Is there any connection between the donor family and the person who is the receiver of an organ or tissue?
Mm-hmm. So in Ontario, our laws dictate that we can't identify an organ or tissue donor, and we can't identify a recipient. But it is really meaningful for organ donor families and recipients to have some amount of contact. And so part of Ontario Health Family Services Aftercare, we do encourage both recipients and donor families, if they wish, we encourage them to write a letter to each other. And the letter is given to Trillium so that Trillium can then send it on to the receiving party with any identifying information removed from the letter. But it's a really powerful and meaningful gift for a donor family, I think in particular, to receive a letter from a recipient and just to hear a thank you from them in a letter like that, and to know that someone is out there and living their life because of that selfless gift and action that they took.
Now, what's the difference between the donations after death and people who donate while they're living? For instance, liver or kidney, where people, they do meet the donor. They do know that. So is that part of your work too?
It's actually not. So I only work in deceased donation. Living donation is, of course, an excellent opportunity for those people who need a liver or a kidney transplant if they have someone who is willing and capable to give that gift. But there are, of course, many people out there in Ontario. There's over 1,000 people right now on just the kidney wait list and waiting for a deceased donor because they don't have a person in their life that is healthy enough or capable or not a good match to be a living donor for that person. So living donation is wonderful. It's most often somebody who knows the recipient who ends up donating, but there are some anonymous living donors out there as well, which is a phenomenal topic as well. Maybe not for today's podcast, but yeah, we at Trillium Gift of Life, we focus on the deceased donation.
Is there an age limit? Does that come into it? Like I'm thinking, there's nothing left of this body that you want. But I mean, even for eyes, like, is there a point where you say, it's nice, but it's not really going to be useful?
No thanks.
That's another great question. And I have people tell me that all the time as maybe the reason that they didn't register as an organ or tissue donor because they feel that they're too old or they smoke too much or they have some other chronic health condition that there probably is nothing that they could give that would benefit somebody else. But we really encourage everyone to register as an organ and tissue donor. There's no upper age limit for registering. And as far as the organ donation, there's technically no upper limit for an organ donor age. We don't rule somebody out for age. So we have had donors who are over 90 who have successfully donated a liver. I know, hard to believe. It's very, very rare. The 90-plus-year-old I read about in the States last year. So in my own experience, my oldest donor personally was around 82. But we encourage everybody to register and don't rule yourself out. I have had patients who thought for sure that they wouldn't be able to be a donor because they had smoked heavily over the years and they had end-stage lung disease, that kind of thing. But their kidneys were still functioning and they were able to successfully donate kidneys after death. So we encourage people not to self-screen, and you don't lose anything by registering. It's signing yourself up, and you may never be in that situation that you would be even eligible to help somebody else out. But then if you are, we take a look at every potential donor case by case, and maybe it could be a life-saving gift for somebody else.
I don't know if there's an answer to this question, but have you ever come across a situation where there's discord in the family and someone steps in and tries to stop someone's, registered as an organ donor, and then a family member steps up and says, not a chance? Does that happen? And if so, what happens?
What do we do?
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. I think you can all imagine that families don't always agree.
Mm-hmm. No.
So certainly we have lots of scenarios where either two family members or groups of family members all can't agree on the course of action, or somebody has registered and the family don't agree with that decision to pursue organ donation as well. So it puts someone like me in a very difficult spot because I want to advocate for the deceased person who can't advocate for themselves any longer, but they did make a decision and make a registered consent decision for organ donation. So I work really hard to try to make it possible for the family to agree for donation to happen. But we certainly do have situations where the family are opposed, and our practice, unfortunately, we don't stand in the way of a family's firm decision. So we try to give them time, we try to give space, we try to explore the reasons why they want to go against their loved one's wishes. But if they are, in the end, adamantly opposed to donation, then we don't stand in the way.
And this underscores why it's so important not to just register yourself as a donor, but to talk to the people who you have assigned as your power of attorney, or the person who would be your legal substitute decision maker, because then you can avoid these difficult situations where there is conflict at a time when really families are under an incredible stress and no additional conflict is needed or desired. There is one thing I wanted to come back to. We've talked a lot about registering to be a donor, and I think that when most people who choose to register as a donor sign that form or that consent, they're thinking about, well, if I was ever in a terrible car accident, or I ever had a very sudden illness or a heart attack or those kinds of situations. But most people don't envision that when they reach the natural end of their life, whether that be from chronic illness or from a cancer or for even just, frailty in older age, they don't envision that they could still be eligible to be a donor in those situations. And I just wanted to highlight that people who die a death of not accidental but natural causes are still eligible to be tissue donors. So they are not eligible to be organ donors in most cases, but these are people who still could donate tissue like skin, bone, tendons, or eyes. These are folks who might choose to die in their own home. There are folks who might die in a hospice residence like the one we have in our community, or they might die in a hospital setting. But I don't think that's what most people picture when they register as a donor. So that was just something that I wanted to highlight.
And that's very helpful. And I think that difference between organ and tissue donations really is a helpful piece to understand that possibility of tissue donation is really there for anyone, regardless of that end of life drive. Can I ask you, Emily, what are some of the big reasons or misconceptions, perhaps, or things that people use as reasons not to allow a donation that maybe a family member had agreed to?
There's lots of reasons that I have come across, but the most common for me is in the setting of organ donation. In order to do that donation process, the testing and the matching, we have to delay the withdrawal of the ventilator, the life support. And so that timing piece is the big stumbling block for a lot of families. And understandably, they are often exhausted and in shock, and they want their loved one to be at peace and for peace for themselves as well. So it can be a really challenging stumbling block to come across. But that is the biggest reason, in my experience, why people have declined donation despite their loved one's registered wish to be a donor.
I'm just working through what that might look like in my mind. So this would be a situation where maybe the person was being kept alive. They're dead, but they're being kept alive by machines in the ICU. And it's been decided to withdraw life support, that the person cannot recover from this. But if they were going to donate organs, it would mean keeping them alive on those machines for maybe several more hours while the recovery team is getting assembled and the OR and all of that. Is that what that would look like?
Yes, exactly. And it's actually a typical timeline for organ testing and matching and recovery is actually more like 24 hours, 48 hours even, depending on if it's a multi-organ donor and all the other logistical pieces that go into coordinating that donation. So we work as hard as we can to support families in those ICUs and in those settings so that the family can get some rest if that's what they need. They can get, sometimes it's practical support that they need. So maybe they have a dog at home that needs to be taken out for a walk. And so they need somebody, a neighbor or somebody to go in and help to make sure that the dog is looked after. Or, and sometimes they need the permission to say their goodbyes if the person has died and they've had neurologically determined death. And we also work with the timing as much as we can because we do have some expedited processes, and in some circumstances we can do the testing in an expedited manner and have organ recovery a little bit faster. It's still going to take 6 to 12 hours, even in an expedited type scenario. But if the timing is the big issue for the family, then those are the kinds of things that we can try to do to make it something that they can live with and feel comfortable with. And because my real desire in these situations is to have the family feel cared for, as well as that donor, and being able to advocate for them, and have them in the future not be looking back and having any regrets about what they chose and about how things went. Like, the worst has usually already happened for these families. They've lost someone, and often it's been a shocking, unexpected type death. And so I try to not make anything worse and try to give the support that they need to get through that process.
Yes, throughout the time we've been talking, I've just been aware that your involved in some very sensitive, tender, stressful, overwhelming situations with family.
Yes.
Yeah, these are really delicate times.
Yeah. When myself or one of my colleagues gets involved, it's always high emotions. Mm-hmm. Families are usually in a very heightened state. Mm-hmm. And so it's really amazing to me, and it really is such a privilege to meet all the people that I do meet who have that generosity and strength to consent to donation in those circumstances. I'm meeting them often on the worst day of their life, and they have the ability to think beyond the situation that they're in and think about a stranger that they'll never meet and give that incredible gift.
Yeah, you're seeing some of the beauty of humanity.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is. This job gives me a lot of perspective. I see a lot of terrible things that happen, and that just reminds me of to not take for granted all of the many blessings that I have. And then it just instills faith in humanity when I see families like the ones that I do work with who consent to donation. It's a real privilege to be a part of those types of scenarios.
I'm sure there are certain religious or cultural groups, for instance, who would not engage in organ donation or tissue donation because of religious beliefs. How prevalent is that?
That's certainly a factor that in many of my conversations, a lot of people bring that up as that their religion doesn't support organ or tissue donation. Most major religions, most of the more widely known religious groups do support organ and tissue donation, but everyone has their own personal beliefs. And there are certainly, I've had lots of situations where that has been the reason why people have declined organ and tissue donation. So I just encourage people to speak with their own faith leaders, or if they have other mentors within their own faith group, to talk it over with them. And if they're not sure, to discuss how their religion views organ and tissue donation, because many religions see it as like the ultimate gift. It's an act of generosity, and it's saving a life, which is highly valued in most religions.
Well, I would say as we're about to wrap up, I would feel here, and it's been a really good discussion, but I guess for both of you, are there any things that are important bits of information that we haven't touched on that you would like to include so that people have all the things that you came hoping to be able to disseminate today?
Well, I know that a lot of your listeners work in a palliative care setting, maybe work in home care, work in hospice care, work in hospitals, or maybe are caregivers in a personal way. And one thing we didn't touch on today was just Trillium Gift of Life Network as a resource to those people. So I think if you're a professional caregiver and you feel like you would like to have some ideas about how to open this conversation when you're helping people with advanced care planning, Trillium Gift of Life does have resources about that. They also are a resource for you to phone if a client that you're working with expresses an interest in donation. Trillium can speak to them directly, can help assess their possible eligibility as a donor, and can help to sort out what that process would look like for them. This is how, even though I'm a physician, this is how I arranged for my sister-in-law to be able to donate her eyes, was by phoning Trillium Gift of Life and having a conversation. And really from there, they made the necessary arrangements. They assessed her eligibility. They walked her family through it. So I just wanted our listeners to know that they're available as a resource to you as well.
That's a great reminder. And I'm so glad that it worked out for your sister-in-law and that she was able to leave that legacy, and that it is something Trillium will try to assess any potential donor case by case. And sometimes that means, not having a formal arrangement for how they're going to do tissue recovery for someone who has passed away at home, but they will find a way to transfer to a funeral home where they can do the eye recovery, or to another facility where it's possible to be done. And so I'm just really glad that worked out in that case as well. And for my final message, just to remind everyone to consider organ and tissue donation and register your wishes. And of course, talk to your family and friends. And signing up, you're not really losing anything. It takes 2 minutes of your time to do that. And the chances of you actually being eligible and in a situation at end of life to be an organ donor, you're actually five to 6 times more likely to need an organ or tissue at some point in your life than to be a donor. So myself, I'm registered, and I hope that it doesn't come up for many, many years. But if the worst were to happen, my family all know that if I don't need any of my vital organs any longer, then I hope that they can help somebody else out.
Thank you so much. I'm wondering if on just our outgoing note here, can you just speak to the medals? Because this sounds like a lovely note that you said that you got a picture of the medals that your family members have received, Natalie.
I did, and the letter that came along with them. So I'm just going to look at that right now.
And in the meantime, while you're looking that up, it really is register and then communicate, isn't it? Like, tell your family, your friends, your loved ones, the ones that are going to be there if the question comes to bear. So register and communicate, eh?
Absolutely.
Sorry, over to you, Natalie.
I'm just going to read the letter that came with April's medal, because I think it's a nice way to wrap up. It says, "Dear donor family, each year the lives of many recipients are saved or enhanced through the compassion and altruism of organ and tissue donors and their families. Please accept this medal on behalf of Trillium Gift of Life Network and all recipients in recognition of your loved one's life-saving legacy. On this medal is an image of the beloved maple leaf silhouetted by another. These represent the recipient silhouetted by the donor as the donor is passing life to the recipient."
That's lovely.
Lovely.
Thank you so much, both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to What Now? On the Threshold of Life, Death, and Grief. What Now is produced in partnership with Hospice Peterborough, dedicated to providing compassionate care and support to individuals and families facing life-limiting illness and loss. What Now is recorded at Thin Spaces Studio in Peterborough, Ontario. Special thanks to Paradise Garage for providing the music. Technical support is provided by Sean Heichert and audio engineering by Kevin Fleming. More episodes of What Now are available for free on most major podcast platforms. If you found value in our conversations, please support us by following the show, leaving a 5-star review, and sharing it with your friends and loved ones. If you'd like to support the essential work of Hospice Peterborough, please consider visiting hospicepeterborough.org/donate. Your contribution helps us continue to provide vital care and support. Until next time, may you find peace and comfort on your journey.